Hey everybody out there, and welcome to my political opinion channel. So here behind me I have the political power chart, and for those of you who don't know, it's basically just a more accurate way of portraying the political spectrum without all the conflation that you get from making it just a black and white, left to right spectrum, which, that conflation ultimately leads to the anger and the division that we have come to hold so dear to the political process. And basically, all governmental systems and ideologies can fit somewhere on this graph and still be a very accurate portrayal of that ideology. So, I study politics mostly recreationally, and every now and then I'll just come in and try to label up the chart with where different respective ideologies belong. And so I had friends over one day last week, and we're talking politics, and I had my chart back here labeled up, probably somewhat inaccurately, and he goes, "Hey Joe, if socialism is in the middle, that makes it kind of like a middle ground, right? So what's so bad about socialism?" And, I was trying to remain objective, and I didn't really jump on all of my go-to rule of thumb reasons and answers for that. So I just kind of kept it very, very objective and non-biased. But ever since then, I have really been thinking about it, and I have constructed a comprehensive list of 5 main reasons why socialism sucks. So what's so bad about socialism? Well, first of all, when we talk about socialism, viewing the chart, we have to understand that the vertical axis is authoritarianism, basically legal control, and the horizontal chart is difference in economic system, basically how much economic control you're granting to the government versus how much is reserved for the populace. So when we talk about socialism, socialism as an ideology exists somewhere in this area, dipping into the leftist hemisphere, but not quite as far over as communism. First main problem with socialism is that it is an involuntary collectivism. As is all economic policy on the left, it is centered around involuntary collectivism. So what is collectivism? Basically any system that involves people pooling their resources for a common cause. Some great examples of voluntary collectivism are banking systems, for instance, or insurance systems. And these systems work because people choose to be a part of them. In economic ideologies such as communism and socialism, they are involuntary in that people do not choose to be a part of them. It's just the law. If you don't want your resources pooled with everybody else, you get legally punished for it. So that's the first main problem, is that it is one of those systems of involuntary collectivism. You have massive amounts of people paying into this one system, but whatever you pay into it is most of the time almost guaranteed not to be what you're going to get back out of it. A great example of that is Social Security. Do you actually get back out what you paid into it? Absolutely not. If everybody just saved their retirement money, they would get so much more. If everybody saved their retirement money and invested in it for the whole time that they were collecting it, it would be phenomenal how much more they would get. So involuntary collectivism, huge problem. Number 2, second biggest problem with socialism is the unsustainability of it. Massively unsustainable. Pretty popular saying from, albeit conservative, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Theresa May. The biggest problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. This is a very true statement, but even on the other side of things, I mentioned that May was a conservative, hinting that she may have been biased in her remarks. But even on the other side of things, there's a quite popular strategy devised by leftist sociologists Richard Cloward and Francis Piven that states that you can essentially delve into socialism more and more, until eventually the economic system gets so overloaded that you really have no choice but to convert over to extreme pure communism. So even on the left, many of their views and theories accept and focus on the idea that socialism is ultimately unsustainable. The third problem with socialism is that it is an automatic and enforced monopoly. So anybody who understands economics probably hates the concept of monopolies. You give one interest, usually a corporate interest, but you give one interest all the power to make all the decisions over anybody who wants that particular industry, whether it be a service or a product. Anybody who wants to buy from that industry, if they're buying from a monopolized interest, that interest has all the power to decide quality control, price control, variety of product or service. So government utilities work in much the same way. If there's 30 different power companies that you can choose to buy your power from, you might have a really good choice. But now it's a single payer system. The government runs most of the utilities, and if you want a cheaper option or a better option, you're just out of luck. The main problem with socialism is that most things would actually operate as a utility, which is an automatic monopoly, but it's enforced by law, so it's an enforced monopoly as well. The fourth problem with socialism is the lack of freedom that it generates. Of course, we already talked about how socialism is an enforced monopoly. That really plays into the freedom of choice. Do I want to buy from these people, or those people? Well, sorry, you really only have one choice. But another freedom that it takes away is what I commonly refer to as the freedom of ambition. Now, the main culprit of restricting the freedom of ambition is truly communism. But socialism does play a little bit of a part in that. And what I mean by freedom of ambition is the choice of how much you want to work. See, in true capitalism, not what we have today, but in true capitalism, everybody really has a phenomenal amount of freedom to decide what they want to do with their life, how much they want to invest in either themselves or a company or a team or whatever. In true capitalism, you really have that choice of, hey, I want to work a normal life, which will reward me with normal fruits of my labor, and I will be able to live a normal life when I'm not at work, Or you have that choice of, hey, I want to work really, really hard. I'll sacrifice, a lot of my time and money to invest into myself or my company or whatever. And as a result of that, I will yield excellent fruits of my labor. And on the other end, too, in a capitalistic system, you really have the freedom of saying, hey, I'm not really cut out for this working life. I don't really care if I'm poor. I have that freedom, and I'm going to exercise it. And ultimately, you even have more freedom than that in a capitalistic system, because if you decide, hey, I'm not really cut out for the working life, but I am really good at this, and it pays super well, so I'm just going to do that. Or I'm good at this other thing, and it's not necessarily a lot of work, but it pays really well. People are amused by it, or people need it nonetheless, and it pays very well, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Whereas, in a more communist system, in a more leftist system, each step you take to the left takes one more of those options away, takes one more freedom of choice and freedom of ambition option away from you. It's one less job you can work at. It's one less company competing for labor, offering really good deals for the laborer. And you also get things, the government will ban certain industries. Certain things today, are not a whole lot of work, but people cannot do them because they're illegal. And the fifth major problem with socialism is that it provides an incredible potential for abuse. Now, of course, I'm not one to act like anybody on the system is abusing the system. Of course, anybody with a modicum of intellectual honesty has to admit that a lot of the people on the system truly need it. But you also have to admit that there are documented cases of abuse. And if there are documented cases of abuse, that means that there are also undocumented cases of abuse. The only thing that I would argue is that if If every citizen weren't having 25, 30, 40% of their incomes extracted from them, practically nobody would need that kind of assistance. And the people who left who would still need that assistance would be able to get it through charities and more effective means. And also we can see how as policy progresses further and further to the left, that standard of abuse just drops dramatically, more and more and more over time. We're currently in California with Jerry Brown pushing policy that would eliminate requirements for subsidized income. So basically, anybody can just get welfare for any reason. And if that's not opening the doors for massive potential abuse, I don't know what is. And lastly, the main consideration I will leave you with pertaining to the failures of socialism is if you really want to know what the problems of socialism are, open your eyes and look around. Opponents of capitalism say that we still live in a capitalist state, but one glance around you will confirm that that's not true. Since approximately 1913, with the introduction of the federal income tax, and much more so in the 1930s with the introduction of New Deal politics, and the massive sweeping amount of socialism that was allowed to permeate our economy during that time. Most of those socialist systems that were implemented then are still in place today, and they create all the same problems that we just talked about. In addition to that, we also live in a massively corporatist society and economy, where large corporate interests are allowed to influence the government, and they get payback in return for that. Both of these concepts of all the socialized programs and the social systems that we have in our country, and the corporatocracy and the amount of control and monopolization and governmental kickback that these corporations are allowed to have, both of those systems are very much anti-capitalistic, and we still call it capitalism, so capitalism still gets a very bad name for all of this. Tune in next time to find out the problems of corporatism. The third problem with socialism is there's not enough of these guys.